Hey, good people. Grits or cream of wheat? Who the hell is racist? Does anyone ever ask if they touch your hair?
Black Like Me.
You're listening to Black Like Me with Dr. Alex G., a podcast that invites you to experience the world through the perspective of one black man, one conversation, one story, or even one rant at a time. Here's Dr. G.
Black Like Me.
Hello, Black Like Me podcast family. I hope that you're doing well. I just wanted to do a brief introduction to this very exciting episode. I had the honor of having the Honorable Tammy Baldwin on Black Like Me. Tammy Baldwin hails from the state of Wisconsin. She is a member of the U.S. Senate, and she has served our community in so many different ways. To her credit, I appreciate the fact that she, as a very prominent member in the Democratic Party, reached out to me because of comments I said on Zoom calls and in speeches that said, I really want Democrats to not take black voters for granted, and to make sure that in addition to doing what's got to happen in November, that they're thinking about the black agenda. Her office reached out to me. She agreed to be on my podcast without a moment of hesitation. So I just want to say a couple of things here. I want you to listen really closely to this conversation because I asked some very pointed questions. So I want you to think about, what did you hear? What did you not hear? I also want you to know that these fine folks work for us. We elect them and they work for us. So I know that people who listen to this podcast vote differently, but you're from every state in the union. Please know that you have access to your elected officials. You can call, you can email, you can write and say, here are my thoughts, here are my concerns. There are a plethora of things that they deal with. But if we begin to reach out to those representatives, come on, there are only 2 per state, and say we are concerned about issues that involve black people and issues of mass incarceration or issues of economic development, wealth development in the black community, they'll have to listen. So what I want you to understand is Senator Baldwin was very accessible to me and has agreed to even come on again. But what I think she did, well, I hope she does. But what I want you to do is to know that you can reach out to the people who you have elected and ask them these same kinds of questions. They might not come on your podcast, but they do have a responsibility to respond to your inquiries. So enjoy this episode, a very frank and very candid discussion with the Honorable Senator Tammy Baldwin. But I want you to listen to this and to understand that we, the people, have a right to direct and inform those whom we have elected. They are representatives. They represent us. So let's not sit silent and complain around the television. Let's help those we've elected to remember what we've elected them for. Enjoy this episode. I enjoyed the discussion.
Black Like Me.
Hey, good people. Welcome back to another exciting episode of Black Like Me with Dr. Alex G. Each week, it's my duty, it's my responsibility to bring you thought-provoking discussions around what's impacting African Americans and African American life in America. And today is no exception. I'm really excited about today's interview for a number of reasons. The Honorable Tammy Baldwin, Senator Tammy Baldwin, who hails from the state of Wisconsin, is my guest today. And we're going to be talking about a plethora of things. I've been talking both to black and white Democrats in my city, around the state, who have an interest in what happens to and for Black people in America. And so I'm so excited about that. The senator was born and raised in Madison by her grandparents. She was valedictorian from Madison West High School. We'll talk about that in a minute. That's also my alma mater, 1980. I'm class of 1981. We were actually in high school together for about 3 years. She did a double major at Smith College in mathematics and political science. And her first political office was at the age of 24, was a Dane County supervisor in 1986. At that time, that must have been one of the youngest county supervisors to come on board. She's been a member of the Democratic Party, served 3 terms in the Wisconsin State Assembly, representing the 78th District. And from 1999 to 2013, she served in Wisconsin's 2nd Congressional District in the United States House of Representatives. She's been serving us for a good while. In 1988, she became the first openly gay woman and first openly LGBT woman elected to the United States Congress. And in 2012, she was elected to the United States Senate. Her current committees, if they haven't changed since my research, Committee on Appropriations, on Commerce, Science, and Transportation, and also Committee on Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions. And she's also a member of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. I can go on and say so many other things about what she's doing, and I'm sure that will come up in the course of our conversation. But Senator Baldwin, I'm so happy to have you here today. Thank you for being my special guest on Black Like Me.
I am so excited to join you, Dr. G, and thank you so much for inviting me. I am so looking forward to our conversation.
I am too. Now, my listeners, and we have listeners in about 80 plus countries, Senator, and every state of the union. So it's been really great. African Americans and other people of color tune in because they resonate with the voice. But then there's a large white following who really want to understand the issues that are impacting African Americans. And so it's a real broad swath of individuals who are listening and who are participating. Now, I wouldn't be fair if I didn't open up with some icebreakers, because people will say, you didn't do that just because it was a senator. So for your reputation and mine, Senator, there are a couple of questions I've got to ask that I ask almost every guest. When you were growing up, did you have a preference between grits or cream of wheat?
Grits.
Okay. All right, you're making Madison proud right now, Senator. And I'm just curious, when you did eat them, was it with butter and sugar? Or were you more of a savory and salt person with your grits?
Sweet, for sure, sweet.
Oh, we're going to get along, Senator. We are going to get along just fine. Did you have relatives while you're growing up, or friends that you knew who had plastic on their furnitures and in their furniture, like in a special room in their house?
Yes.
Tell me about it.
Well, my step-grandma had all the living room furniture had plastic over it, where she received guests, clear plastic.
Yes.
It was, we were going to keep those from getting wear and tear.
And listen, that plastic is no fun when you sit on it when it's really hot in the summer and your skin's sticking to it. Oh man. Well, you know what? Because we have so many things to talk about, I'm going to leave the black icebreakers right there. But thank you. That was fun. I was hoping that you were going to be a sweet grit person. That's how I ate them as well. Now, West is a large high school, probably about 2,000 students, but we were there at the same time. So you were class of 80, and I was class of 81. So we have things in common, like the Moosehead Shed, where we would buy candy before class, after class, between class. Were you involved in debate or political organizations back at West?
Not so much. In middle school, I had gone to what's now Velma Hamilton Middle School, and I was very involved in student government. Not so much at Madison West. I will tell you that, do you remember at the University of Wisconsin-Madison at the same time as we were in high school, there was a rather comical student government that put flamingos on Bascom Hill and
of course.
Statue of Liberty. And well, I think that in my year, they were trying to mimic that rather than doing serious student government stuff. The person who ultimately won the student government presidency in my year, my senior year, went on the platform of turning outside the cafeteria, the sort of outdoor space. He was going to turn that into an aquarium and put big fish into it. So you could.
Was that where we had the fine arts gathering? Like right
outside?
Okay, or sort of the enclosed terrace.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Oh,
so that was his platform. He was going to turn that into an aquarium so we could look at big fish while we were eating our lunches. I dabbled in track and field in my freshman and think freshman and sophomore year. Yeah, that was, so I was a sprinter.
Oh, that's great. I was on the boys track team, and so some of my friends were a little bit older, like Steve Connor, Dan Nienhauser. I can't remember Tammy's name, but she was a hurdler. Tammy Schultz.
Yes.
She was a really good hurdler. So West, I think, won state either that year or the year after that. Were you at West when they had those crazy toga parties or the food fight in the cafeteria? It was when John Belushi's Animal House thing came out, and they were like crazy toga parties. Would you have been out of West by that time? But there was a crazy food fight that got a lot of people in trouble.
Yeah, I don't think I think I escaped at least the trouble part of it.
Those are fun days. I have to say, looking back, my years at Madison West were probably shaped me so much. But also probably some of the fondest memories came between those years, and so that's great that we had that in common. I just want to say to our Black Like Me podcast listeners, I know that there's some things that the senator wants to talk about, but I've got three main agendas and a bunch of questions. One is I want to get Black people to the poll. That's my first agenda. I want to get them to the poll. Secondly, I want to get them to the poll because we need a new president. We need a president. And so that's my second agenda. But the third agenda is that I really want to nudge and push the Democratic Party to remember, or to at least understand, the feelings, the sentiments of many African Americans across the class spectrum are feeling very disillusioned and unmotivated. And I'm wanting to help voice that and not just talk about that around the water coolers, but I want to share that with someone who can take it someplace and do something with it. The last thing I'll say before we just jump into some of our questions is I respect the fact that Senator Baldwin responded to comments that I made in several forums, that we're about to have this national convention in our backyard. And as Black Americans, as Black Madisonians, we're not feeling included. This is a party that by and large we have voted for. Growing up, we heard older Black, our uncles and aunts and grandmas talking about what the Democratic Party has done for us. And I've stressed this also with Ben Wickler. I've said to others, because I want to be a part of the solution. And I've just said, I'm feeling a sense of abandonment. I'm hearing people talk about being disillusioned and not motivated. And so I'm hoping that this conversation will go somewhere and will either encourage your colleagues, you and your colleagues, to think differently about this, or to put together different strategies, but to know that that's there, because there's time to turn this tide. Whether it's perception or not, there's time to address it, because Wisconsin is a major state in this upcoming election, a major swing state, and we cannot afford to have unmotivated Black people at home. And so the senator's office reached out to me. I didn't reach out to them. I just made those statements and just said, I'm the most tenured clergy person in this city, irrespective of race and background. I'm a part of almost every major Black political, social, fraternal organization, church organization, and none of us are talking about our connections with our Q representation. And so this is an opportunity to give you a platform, Senator, to respond to some of the things that I'm hearing Black voters say, and white voters who care about how Blacks feel in this election. So with all of that being said, I'm very sincere when I say I respect you and your time and your willingness to be here and talk with me today.
Thank you.
My family came to Madison, Senator, 50 years ago. I was 6 years old, second grader, and we came from Chicago. She was getting out of an abusive marriage to my father. I was 6. You met my sister Leleda a few weeks ago when you met some of the State Street artists. She was 4. It was a land of great opportunity. In the early 1970s, Milwaukee, with A.O. Smith and all the other companies, was called, I believe, by Time Magazine as one of the best places for Black people to live. What do you say when you're at meetings in Washington and people begin to talk about the fact that by many, and I don't mean just magazines, but by many of us who are African Americans are reading statistics and reading that Wisconsin's one of the worst places for Black people to live in comparison to their white counterparts? How do you frame that for people? How do you respond when people say, you're a senator from Wisconsin, aren't you having all of those race to equity reports and racial justice issues and mass incarceration and justified anger?
What do you say when people ask you about that aspect of Wisconsin?
Well,
Or
I
do
try
they?
to take, certainly we talk a lot about it. Oftentimes I bring it up because we want solutions, and we want to not have the reputation or reality, much more important, the reality of being one of the most segregated states in terms of housing, in terms of incarceration, in terms of pay gaps, in terms of educational quality and opportunity. And I also start a little bit with the same sort of history you were talking about, understanding that the north side of Milwaukee used to be one of the most flourishing
Right.
Black middle class neighborhoods. And when industry left, I think of Century City, which is, now it's remediated brownfields, but when industry left, there used to be 5,000 people who could walk to work and get a good salary, able to buy homes, not rent. And you go through the same neighborhood now, and it's painful. And it's important that we understand, all the factors at play, because it is not solely an issue of jobs going away. It's also an issue of housing and predatory rental markets. I don't know if you've seen the book Evicted or yeah.
Actually, the author's a friend of mine.
Matthew Desmond is amazing. I've
Yeah.
had the chance to meet him a number of times, but I think about, first it's written in this sort of anecdotal narrative of people's experiences
Right.
in the relationship between landlords and renters, and how much of a percentage of one's take-home pay goes to housing. But then it gets into sort of the statistics, which are staggering in terms of how eviction causes poverty, not necessarily is caused by poverty, right? And causes educational inequities, causes health inequities, and then it gets into some policy proposals. So, when we're talking about how do we make it better, it's partly by really digging deep to understand the complexity of the challenges. And I just think because of the extent of segregation, particularly in Milwaukee, but certainly in Madison also, that too often there's just perceptions of other that aren't based on reality. And you got to really get to know people and dig deep to understand that these things are interconnected. I will say, and this may be going a little off the question, but the past months, this year, have really, I think, lifted, let's say, a veil on racism, discrimination, bias, and inequities, disparities. Starting with the coronavirus pandemic.
Yes.
And if it weren't for the fact that Milwaukee last year had, in their county board, declared racism as a public health issue, a public health crisis, Milwaukee was one of the first cities to report out coronavirus cases and note race.
Yes.
And ethnicity. And I remember talking to the public health director in Milwaukee, who had been interviewed, I think, in the Atlantic magazine, of sort of, why are you doing this? And but for doing this, it might have taken us a lot longer in America to figure out that this horrendous pandemic was disproportionately impacting African Americans and Latinx and other racial minorities. And so Milwaukee played a very key role, Wisconsin, in identifying this. And as I said, lifting that veil. A lot of people knew that was already going on in terms of disproportionate negative health outcomes, whether it's, low birth weight babies or, other things that have huge impact on the health of families and communities. But this was something that the entire public began to see all at once. And then add on to that the murder of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, and all of a sudden another veil was lifted. Not so much in the Black community that knew all of this for decades and decades and decades, but for whites and for others who, because there's so much segregated living that, again, people made judgments without knowing.
Sure. So in our community, Senator, we've known that those things have been real since Urban League of Greater Madison had a study out in 2010 called The State of Black Madison. The Race to Equity report came out in 2013. I wrote an op-ed piece called Justified Anger in 2013. So we've been trying to cry out. So we feel like as a Black community, we've been doing our part. What's the party's response to these unveiled truths now? What's your vision or your hope for the state of Wisconsin that will happen in terms of policy, economics, opportunity, education? How do we make sure that a state whose motto is forward, that we don't look at all of these, that we don't look under the cover and move back? Because that's the fear of Black people today, that we will look at it. And for many of those things, we're ground zero. So how will that translate to policies, ideals, changes for our Democratic leaders in the state of Wisconsin concerned the welfare of Black people?
Yeah, I'm going to take 1 second to just note about the Race to Equity in 2013. I was sworn into the United States Senate for the first time in 2013. And one of the things that was really important to me as I put together a staff, both in Wisconsin and in Washington, D.C., was to make sure that we were all as a team knowledgeable about what was unveiled in the Race to Equity. And I remember having an all-staff meeting where we had about an hour and a half long presentation on, the methodology, all the geeky stuff, but also, all the measurements that were taken there, and a big discussion about sort of what can we do at the national level to help, and how do we partner at the state and local level to see improvement. And those sort of discussions are really, really important. Although you just worry that something like that at some point gets put on a shelf and gathers dust rather than becoming a living document and a living set of recommendations that we
because
use.
That's happened before. That's happened a lot.
Right. So let me just take, now that the veil has been lifted, let's go to current day. So I'll do this sort of where we are with regard to the response to George Floyd's murder, when the entire nation became engaged some way or another in seeing it, because it was videotaped from a number of different perspectives, talking about it, understanding that this wasn't an isolated incident, but happens with alarming frequency.
Right.
And we, first of all, knew that there was a federal role to play. Obviously, policing is also local and has state oversight, but
Sure.
but we have federal law enforcement, and while we can't enact rules that apply to local police departments, we can provide great incentives for them to adopt certain policies. So what was ultimately created, and in the driver's seat, in the lead of all of this, was the Congressional Black Caucus, and in the Senate are two Democratic African American members of the Senate, Cory Booker and Kamala Harris, to put together the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act of 2020. And I remember some really powerful conversations that went on within our Democratic caucus about opening people's eyes further about the type of abuses of use of force that people had experienced, witnessed. But one of the first things I remember Senator Booker saying was, we need data. And you said, that's not a response to, but I'm a math major, as you said in my introduction. I get that if you just hear these as isolated do we know from a given police department how many times force needed to be used? And then do we know the race of the subject of that use of force? And can we then note patterns of practice, right? And so that is a key part of it, and then transparency of that data. And I think that part of confronting racism and the issues of harm because of racism really does involve understanding our histories, the histories of our institutions, measuring, so we can also measure whether there's progress or not. And so data collection is a huge piece of that, mandatory data collection, I might add, because we've had requests, voluntary requests, but we haven't put it together. And I also think it just helps communities to be doing that locally, to understand where they are. Then, of course, there was the banning of dangerous practices like chokeholds and no-knock entries. That was banned in the bill at the federal level because that's what we can control, but also powerful incentives for local departments to do the same. And then ways for communities, grants to communities to engage in the very complex and difficult discussions about reimagining what should public safety look like in our community, and what does it involve, and should we criminalize addiction? Should we criminalize serious mental illness, or should we have maybe other models of treatment? Maybe we should have a healthcare model of addressing some of these issues. So can we as communities reimagine what public safety looks like in a way that lessens our reliance on the criminal justice system and increases our reliance on fighting fighting conditions that lend themselves to a lack of safety.
Senator, do you think that thank you for that. Do you think we have enough buy-in to create repercussions or penalties for people who do violate chokeholds and the kinds of things that you're talking about? Because again, as a Black person, that wasn't the first time we saw someone choked. We watched what happened to Eric Garner on film. Our fear is that, again, we're in Wisconsin. I'm in Madison, a very intellectual community, a very academic community. And the idea of reports and white papers cause us to collectively gasp and say, we're going to talk about it for 3 years, and then it will become something on the shelf. And so it is your hope. I mean, let me back up and ask it this way. We're having these studies. You know, Mr. Booker is asking for data, but do we know what we're going to do with that data? Or are we going to figure that out when we get the data? Because that will make people lose it.
Hey, this is Eli Steenlich, the engineer and editor of the Black Like Me podcast. And I just wanted to take a moment to tell you about Patreon, our service that lets you support the show. And we know that you all love the show and listen every week. And so if you want to keep supporting what we do, make sure you go to patreon.com/blacklikeme. It's never been easier to give to the show and support it. We have a new $2 level, which is cheaper than a cup of coffee. So go ahead and go over to the website, patreon.com/blacklikeme, and make sure you keep the content coming. And we've already started to do some new things that we're excited about because of the Patreon supporters that we have. So we're going to take you back to the show and back to Dr. G. But thanks for listening.
The Justice and Policing Act of 2020, which, by the way, is not law because it hasn't been brought up in the Senate.
Right.
We can get into the politics of that. But I think it is reprehensible that there is no government agency collecting this data and reporting this data.
Absolutely.
And the only way that people have been able to get a sense of the absolute disproportionate impact of use of force on communities of color, but particularly Black community members, the only way is through, I think, one newspaper that has been diligence, screening records from across the country in order to try to come up with a database. That's, we need the data, but that's not enough.
Right.
Right? Because, that's not enough, and it has to go with action. We have to keep on saying, okay, we're going to have a measurement, or this is the baseline, but let's look at it again, and let's look at it again, and let's look at it again. I don't want to, I'll go back to the pandemic. It was because one county in Wisconsin was keeping track of coronavirus cases and deaths by race that we kind of opened that whole discussion. We have to understand the problem and its proportions at the same time as we're working on solutions.
Yes, and one thing I'll just suggest, Senator, is and whether that there would be some assertion of authority, whether that's from your office or Mark Pocan's office or someone's office. We've got to assert some authority so that when these happen, when Milwaukee reports on the COVID-19 incidents, or when there's a news incident in Madison, or the homecoming fiasco, there's a video made and there was no Black representation. I don't feel that our elected officials from the Democratic Party communicate with us. Again, I'm not a demagogue. I don't assume because if someone hasn't communicated with me, they haven't communicated with someone else. I'm not saying communicating with a Black person, but I'm a part, again, of each major political, religious, social Black network. And because I have 30 plus years in this community as a leader, I'm a pastoral figure to a lot of these folks. So we have lots and lots of discussions. So one of the things I would suggest is town hall meeting, a gathering that when this is revealed, one, how do our elected officials check in with us to ask, how do we keep you safe and you well? How are you weathering this storm? Because my standard word is beleaguered, whether it's a good day or not. Because I can have a great day being dialed into a conversation with the governor about what's going on. My organization, Nehemiah, and through our initiative, Justified Anger, does training on cross-cultural leadership. We were just contracted by a municipality. I won't say it publicly because they might not have announced it yet, but an entire city in Wisconsin has contracted us to work with them to look at law enforcement, community interactions. So we're very involved, but I don't feel like anyone has stopped and said, business leaders, are you watching this? What are you doing? What's the responsibility for the big heavy hitters, the big manufacturers, the institutions? I don't feel like anyone calls them to the carpet to say, what's your role in making this better? When there's a shooting, Senator, when there's looting, when there's perception that Black people are burning down places like State Street, I am called like that. Rev, we need you. The governor needs you. The county executive needs you. Most recently, the mayor needs you. But I'm never called on about water issues. My doctorate is in leadership. I'm never called on about leadership issues. But if the Black people are getting out of hand in the community, then I'm called to the big house. But we're not checked in on. We're sitting here and we're wondering things like this. I'm listening. So anyway, I'll just pause there because I want that to go to another question about some things I'm hearing about from Black voters. But what can you or your colleagues in the Democratic Party do to bring big business and community leaders who happen to be Black and people of color to discuss the economic impact of COVID-19, the economic impact of all of this, the emotional impact of watching George Floyd murdered on television? How does it affect our ability to communicate hope to those who are coming behind us? We're losing Black people from the state of Wisconsin. I've got friends who work in state government for their whole careers, and they are building homes as we speak in North Carolina, in Mississippi. They're moving to Texas because they don't feel that Wisconsin is forward for them. So in light of all the covers being pulled back, I know there can be laws and rules, but Senator, in all honesty, they're not even conversations about how this is impacting us. And our mayor has come out with a statement that racial stress and microaggressions have become a social determinants of health. My organization is under contract with the School of Medicine and Public Policy to decrease those microaggressions by training white allies to understand how to work and create more equitable environments for Black people in business, state government, campus, even in their own communities. So we know that this is real too, but no one has pulled us together and pulled business leaders and governmental leaders, because we don't change policies. We don't have the money or the resource or even the political goodwill or pull to do it. And the two entities who could, business and government, are never in communication with us about what we see, what we need, and what we feel. And I feel that, Senator, is killing Black people who are already at risk. And who's sounding that alarm?
Yeah. Wow, that's a complicated question, but I think the thread that goes through all of that is conversation. And, I know very few instances where you have government, big business, and communities all conversing. It's usually, let's say, bilateral, not all at the same table, which is really, really interesting.
Desperate times call for desperate measures. So that's why I'm suggesting that.
Yeah. But I think that I'd say a couple of things. One, and I certainly we're talking in the context still of a public health pandemic. When we have been working on legislation at the federal level, we have, in terms of pandemic response, I know that there's certainly some things we've gotten right, and there's some things we've not gotten right. I think that one of the issues that I've heard a lot about that sort of involves government, business, and communities is the small business program that was stood up. And everyone was very hopeful about being able to give a loan or a grant to entrepreneurs and small businesses to help them get through. And when that program first opened up, lo and behold, all of the folks who had accounts at the big banks and loans from the big banks were first in line. And it didn't take very long to go through a lot of money and find out that our businesses owned by Black entrepreneurs or in neighborhoods that, are Black neighborhoods predominantly, or Latinx community, we're not getting the funding. And I remember meeting with the Wisconsin African American Chamber of Commerce, a Zoom call, and saying, this is a real problem, and a lot of our businesses, were started with our life savings, not a loan from a bank, or we are banking with a small community bank or minority serving financial institution, and we didn't get any, and we had to go back and try to make adjustments. But that happens way too frequently. It's like we'll set something up, but who's first in line and who's last in line?
Right.
And I remember being so saddened by the fact that something that was meant to reach everyone didn't, right? And we didn't even build any sort of inequity purposefully into it, but it was the impact. I learned a lot from that. And frankly, I'm glad that some of the other programs, I said there's things we got right and there's things we got wrong. I'm glad that some of the other programs have been more equitable in terms of helping people through this pandemic and this ensuing economic crisis.
Yes. And I would just offer up again, Senator, if you or your office or one of your colleagues in the party could facilitate the discussion that I suggest between business and particularly the minority communities. And because COVID and George Floyd, all of these things are pointing to the inequities that African Americans have been fighting for 400 years. Any effort that we could get from your office to provide that kind of discussion, because that's where jobs are created. That's where money could be leveraged, because some of the dollars that we need in our community to build infrastructure in grassroots organizations and start small businesses can come from government. There are loans and there's the SBA programs. But they can also come from businesses. And I feel that it's a missed opportunity to not leverage those relationships and to call for that kind of discussion, because you're right, it begins with a conversation, but you, Senator, could call that conversation. I don't know that the business could. I can't, but you or your office could say there's going to be a discussion and we're going to have some representation, because we have an opportunity to change things in Wisconsin, and I think it's important that we do. I just want to read. There are a couple of questions I had as I just talked with people in my community who are African American, and I'll just hit a couple of them. One gentleman said, he says, "I'm a Black professional." He said, "But my peers and I largely feel that our party, the Democratic Party, is ignoring us because they assume we're just going to vote." Someone said, "Wealthy middle class and Black folks are ready for a plan or an agenda that strengthens the Black community. They want something and someone they can follow." Another person says they just believe that our party is disinterested. I'll just pause right there and just say, what would you like to say to Black voters who are going to be listening to this, who want to see change? They want to vote for their parents' party, and these are thinking, voting folks. Often when we talk about the Black community, we often talk about distress and disenfranchisement, and that's real. My organization addresses that. I'm a product of that reality. My mom moved us here to change that. But I reached out particularly to voting African Americans who are middle class to wealthy. And they feel that our votes are already assumed. And in a state that is considered a swing state, Senator, we can't afford for Black people to be disinterested. We can't afford Black people to say, well, I'm not going to the polls, they're not open, and I'm not going to mail in this absentee vote. So I want to give you a moment, Senator. What do you want to say to Black people who feel we're being overlooked? Let me ask that in two ways, Senator. Sorry about that. My head is spinning so quickly. My first question is, I wouldn't expect you to say, yes, we've ignored Black folks. So I'm not trying to put you in that position. But I guess what I'm asking is, can you respect or understand the perception that Black people feel ignored in this state by what I'll call, just from right now, a party that probably most Black voting folks have supported? Then secondly, I want to give you a chance to speak directly to your Black constituents and motivate them to get to the polls by believing that there's something at the poll for them. So is the assumption, is that assumption fair? And then secondly, what do you want to say to my community?
Yeah, well, I think it is a fair assumption. I think that, first of all, I always step gently when I'm saying, when somebody tells me how they feel,
sure,
I don't try to correct them, right? You feel what you feel, right? And sure. I need to listen to that and figure out for myself, and certainly recommending to others, what it is we can do to address that. And so let me give you a perception, a perception that I know people have, that has been articulated to me, is you only show up around election time, and then we don't see you for whatever period of time. So it's true that now that I'm in the Senate, I'm up every 6 years, and that's a really long term, by the way. And it means that in the meantime, I'm not out there saying, please vote for me in 6 years, please vote for me in 5 years, please vote for me in 4 years. Hopefully I'm out there listening and saying, this is what I'm working on, and I want your, how would this impact you, or how, and let's work together on it, which is a very different interaction with communities and individuals in the state than it is when I am saying, I'm on the ballot in 5 months, and I want you to register to vote. This is how you do it. And I want you to go out and vote for me. So I really think that the importance is to sort of judge at least individual candidates on, when you're not on the ballot, what's the level of interaction, and how are you involving your constituents in making the change that they want to see, as well as, things that I'm working on. So we haven't talked about my motivations for first getting involved in politics, but it was all about healthcare, and all about my being a child with a serious childhood illness, and being uninsured, because then after I got well, I was a kid with a pre-existing health condition, and I went without health insurance, and I thought that was wrong. And I worried about how much my grandparents worried about an illness or an injury being catastrophic in our family. And that became my fight that brought me into public service. Well, that's a fight that many people are still fighting today. And it's really important for me to hear people's stories, to figure out how we get it right, and how we get it better, and how we improve, say, the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, et cetera. I know I digress, but I understand the perception of the party or the candidate only comes around right before November. But I think that we need to figure out how better to have elected representatives in legislative bodies interact with their constituents throughout their term, and it being seen as we're listening and we're here and we're working with you. I think that's a key part of it. Now, the party, is a structure in many ways that is there to elect members of its party to office.
Right.
But I think it's important for members of the party to understand how that is perceived if they're not more. And so, first of all, in terms of advice, to the extent that you care about progressive, compassionate representation, I hope more people get involved in the party. And frankly, I would say run for office, because I know we are better represented when our legislative bodies look like America, look like Wisconsin. And so that's an important piece of it. And then I do think so much of it is about the conversation. I will say one expression that keeps coming up in my mind right now is also this idea of nothing about us without us. And so I have been asked, what is your agenda to address the problems of the African American community? And that's a great question, and I could talk at length on some of the ideas, but I do believe in that phrase, nothing about us without us, that my legislative agenda in terms of passing laws has to be informed by the people who are impacted by it, right?
Exactly.
Right. And so therefore, I think one of the questions to ask is, does my input, if I were in that elective position or that representational position, are the things that I care deeply about important to this party or this candidate? And are they working hard to achieve equity, to be an active anti-racist, to work on the foundational issues that are obstacles to opportunity?
Yes. Senator, thank you. I know you have a very busy schedule. You have another meeting to get into, and you're so gracious to meet with me and talk with me today. I hope the conversation continues. Any information that your office would like to share about some of those initiatives that benefit Black folks, I'd love to share with our listeners and constituents, because the concern is not just seeing candidates at election time, but it's what they're doing in terms of policy. Because again, we have this reputation in the state of Wisconsin. We just have this sense that elected officials can help us. So it's not a criticism as much as it's a plea for help that's turning into a criticism, because I want to see Black people come to the polls. I want to see great change, and I don't want to miss this moment. So I hope that some of what we talked about will help you provide some motivation of sharing it with colleagues, so that, because there's still time to talk, even using Zoom, to reach out to key leaders who can influence people to really get to the polls, because we cannot afford for Black people to not vote in this election. We have enough structural things with gerrymandering, and we saw what happened with Jill Karofsky's, have the pressures of what the Republicans are doing, and the lack of a clearly articulated vision from my Democratic friends. We can't have the convergence of that, because that will keep Black people in their homes, and that could hand Trump Wisconsin again. And neither you nor I want that at all. So if we can, Senator, let's continue talking. I appreciate your time. I want you to get to your next meeting. Thank you for the work that you do for us. And Black people want to feel like we have great representation, that we have access, We want to see change. We want to believe. We're here because we believe in Wisconsin, but we need to believe that Wisconsin believes in us. So please help us create that reality, Senator. And thank you so much. My special guest has been Senator Tammy Baldwin from U.S. Senator Tammy Baldwin from the great state of Wisconsin.
Thank you so much.
Ooh, black like me, yeah.
I want to thank Corey Saffold for creating the music for this podcast, my podcast manager, Tyler Nyland, engineer and editor, Eli Steenledge, my editor, Jeremy Holliday, and a special thank you to WORT Studios, where we record Black Like Me.
Ooh, black like me.
Thank you for listening to today's podcast. You can find out more about Dr. Alex G's amazing work at www.alexg.com. Black Like Me is sponsored by the generosity of the Human Family Unity Foundation.
Ooh, black like me.